I'm here to introduce Greg Nichols, who is the former mayor of Seattle, president of the United States Conference of Mayors, King County councilman, and delegate to the United Nations, and a Harvard fellow. He's a rock star in the mayor's arena, the mayor's sphere. He served 8 years as Seattle's 51st mayor, which is an interesting number, 1/5 as long as our mayor has served. But he's a good guy. Anyway, he was nominated by President Obama, confirmed by the Senate to be a delegate to the 65th session of the General Assembly of the UN. He is, I love this, he's been a leader on climate protection and working at the municipal level to promote policies that reduce greenhouse gases and energy consumption, create urban sustainability, and of course, as we've been hearing today, there's so many arenas that work has to happen in. Rolling Stone called Nichols the Pied Piper of mayors for launching the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement. And over 1,000 mayors have now taken part in that at the local level. He is a recipient of a number of awards. Born in Chicago, he's been in Seattle since he was 6 years old, and began his public service career at the age of 19 with the city while he was attending the University of Washington. I won't go on again. You've got his bio on the program that you can refer to. But I will also tell you that his wife Sharon is here, and it's her birthday. Sharon is over here. Okay. And they are looking forward to a birthday dinner tonight in one of Charleston's excellent locally sourced restaurants. So thank you to Mayor Nichols for coming.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon. And I am very impressed. There were lots of great conversations going on in the room and a high energy level. And as soon as Dana cracked the whip, you all came to attention. So I thank you for that. And I also want to thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I have been, most of the speakers have introduced themselves with how often they've been to Charleston. This is my second visit. My first was several years ago. At the behest of Mayor Riley and something he started called the Mayor's Institute for City Design, where a group of half dozen mayors usually come together with some of the country's best design professionals, and we bring case studies of what we want to achieve in our cities, specific projects, and we help hash it out. We think through the politics of it, we think through some of the design challenges and the like. But Mayor Riley worked us so hard that we never actually got outside. So I thank you for at least giving us an opportunity, Sharon and I, to see some of this beautiful place that you're in. Your 25th anniversary obviously is a time for congratulations and reflection. And I've given that a little bit of thought over the last few days, because in addition to this being Sharon's birthday, it's also the 35th, she's 45, by the way. This is also the 35th anniversary of my asking her to marry me. Now, if you're doing the math and you don't believe that, I ask you to employ the voluntary, just set that aside. Just trust me on it. So I've been thinking about how fast 35 years has gone by. And in terms of the Coastal Conservation League, how fast that 25 years, I'm sure, has gone by. And I've thought back to sort of what was I doing 25 years ago? What was life like? What was our country like? What was the politics like? And for me, I had just been elected to the King County Council. King County is Seattle and about 1 million people around Seattle. So after having been a staff person for a city council member for 8 years, I had the same thought that every staff person ever has, and that is I could do the boss's job as well as he could. And so I tested that by running, and I was learning all the lessons that a new elected official learns. We were pushing hard on something called growth management, which was a relatively new concept in Washington State. Oregon had been a little bit ahead of us. We've caught up and passed them, of course. We were trying to preserve some of the special places in our region that were being gobbled up by urban sprawl. And I was beginning a quest that actually went through my entire 22 years as an elected official to build a mass transit system in the Seattle metropolitan area, which is up and running and undergoing an $18 billion expansion as we speak. So there's been a lot that has happened in those last 25 years. 25 years ago, there was a place called the Soviet Union. And many of us were worried that the arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union would be our downfall. And today we have to tell our children what the Soviet Union was, what it represented, and how that story went. And many times they probably don't believe us. So let me spend just a minute bragging about my place. You have a wonderful place here. Charleston is a beautiful city. The region is wonderful. We had a chance to visit with some relatives down at Fusky Island, and we're going to go from here to a little north of here to visit some more relatives when we're done with the conference, and it's a beautiful place. And Seattle, we're proud because we think we live in the most beautiful place. I won't assert that here, but we feel very lucky. And we also feel as though we have some advantages that work well for us. If you think about the economic history of Seattle, it is one that speaks of creativity and innovation. If you think about Bill Boeing, you have some familiarity with Bill Boeing. He came to Seattle in the first decade of the 20th century because of the timber that was there. He became intrigued at our World's Fair in 1908 with air flight, and in 1916 created the Boeing Company. And that Boeing Company, through the years, was innovative and creative, and eventually built the 707, which led to the jet age, which has changed our globe. You think about Bill Gates and Paul Allen deciding to develop their software in our area, and the fact that helped lead to the information age, which helped to shrink our globe. And probably most creative of all, the good folks at Starbucks, who figured out how to charge $4 for a 50-cent cup of coffee, and we now stand in line. Yesterday we had a good example of that. When there was a break at the college, there was a line down in the Starbucks here. So they've also figured out how to create a place that people want to be and want to interact with one another. And that is an incredibly creative and innovative exercise that they have gone through. And I think that's important, because I think it's going to be the creativity and innovation of the human species that is going to decide whether we survive this century or not. And so I think that you have that, we have that, and there are other places that we're going to see that and count on that to help us meet the challenges that we face. So let me make a confession. When I ran for mayor, which was in 2001, climate protection, climate change was not on the top of my agenda. In fact, it wasn't something that I talked about at all, I guess much like the last presidential election, in my campaign. And that's not because I didn't care. I assumed that the federal government had really smart people working on it. And I also thought we might have some time, the luxury of a little bit of time to think about how we were going to deal with climate change. And it turns out I was wrong on both counts. That the federal government, in addition to not having really smart people working on it, was denying, at least at the top levels, that it was occurring, denying that it was human-caused, and once they did acknowledge that it was occurring and it was human-caused, they denied any responsibility for doing anything about it. And so my aha moment came in 2004 and 2005. And we had a very warm and dry winter in Washington State that particular year. In fact, it was so dry, the ski season was canceled in the Cascade Mountains, which was a tragedy for many people who were passionate about their skiing. And for me as mayor, it raised a number of challenges because the snow that falls in the Cascade Mountains we use for green electricity and clean, pure water. And if we don't have any snow in the Cascades, we're really out of luck. And it was so dry that the mayor of Tacoma and I at one point got on the radio and urged people to shower together. And even in crunchy Seattle, that's a somewhat radical proposition. So it was a real problem. And the real problem was that it wasn't a one-time event. But in fact, we were seeing a trend. From the end of World War II to the present, the trend has been for a less and less of a snowpack. Not every year. Some years we've actually had record snowfalls, but the trend has been downward, and that's a big concern for all of us. And so as the Kyoto Treaty was coming to life in 141 countries on the globe, but not in my country, I decided that there was a moment that we might seize to try and do something about that. And that was the day that the Kyoto Treaty became law, which was February 16, 2005. So I chose to take that day and pledge that Seattle would reduce its emissions voluntarily by the amount called for in that treaty as if the United States had ratified it, which was 7% from 1990 levels by the end of 2012. And I knew that if it was only Seattle, that would be purely symbolic. And it is very difficult to get people to change behavior for strictly symbolic reasons. It just doesn't happen. That's not human nature. So I knew that we needed to have some help with that. So I reached out to some of the usual suspects. Portland, San Francisco, Minneapolis, Oakland, which had Jerry Brown as mayor at the time, so they were certainly suspect. And I asked if they would join with me, and they did. And then we reached out, and I tasked Steve Nicholas, one of the speakers on the earlier panel, and I had fun with this. I tasked him with trying to recruit 141 cities, one for every country. And I did it publicly, not publicly, but at a cabinet meeting, so that one, he couldn't say no, and two, I could see his reaction. And it was pretty priceless because that was a very different kind of a task for our sustainability office than we'd had before. And I also thought we needed to take a little bit different attitude as we approach this. And so I'm going to ask Danner to play a very short video, which I hope takes us from the very somber conversation that we've been having to maybe something that's a little more hopeful and light and fun.
The Alaskan Way Viaduct. It's been called dirty, nasty, ugly, and dysfunctional.
Hi, I'm Matt Smith with the Committee to Save Big Ugly Things.
In the 80s, we stood by as the lower Queen Anne Blob was torn down. In the 90s, we watched helplessly as our kingdom was imploded. Now Mayor Nichols is threatening to take away the biggest, ugliest thing of all, the viaduct.
And given the opportunity to replace it with an even bigger, uglier viaduct, he balks. But wait, it gets worse. He wants to replace it with this.
A beautiful, expansive, urban waterfront park.
We at the Committee to Save Big Ugly Things say enough is enough. Here's what the mayor's office is saying about the waterfront park.
1. It will open up magnificent views. Fact. Unobstructed views decrease worker productivity by 9%. 2. It will be a great place for family picnics. Fact. Picnics increase ant and fly populations by 12%. 3. The park will be a wonderful place for lovers to take a romantic stroll. Fact. 37% of unplanned pregnancies are preceded by romantic activity.
We say stop the madness, and you can help. Save the big ugly viaduct. And consider this, if Mayor Nichols does get rid of the viaduct, you know what's next. I'm Matt Smith with the Committee to Save Big Ugly Things. Please help.
So I hope that translated. There was a lot of Seattle stuff there, but when you're dealing with an issue like climate change, climate disruption, climate protection, it's daunting. The average person thinks, I'm just an individual. I really can't have an effect on this. You know, why even bother? And I think that we have to approach this issue and others in a little bit different way. And that is to give people a sense of hope and even a sense of whimsy about issues that that are difficult and challenging, but ultimately are things that should bring us together. And so as we approach this as mayors across the country, and ultimately I got 1,050 mayors to join with me to pledge to lower their emissions by the amount called for in Kyoto, we practiced a number of old traditions that are honored among mayors, and that is stealing each other's ideas. So if Mayor Riley came up with something here, or Mayor Bloomberg, or actually Bloomberg was a great one to steal the ideas, and then we would share that and learn from the things that worked and didn't work. And in Seattle, because we had started this, we felt that the other cities were watching what we were doing, and that we better walk our talk. Not that we didn't intend to begin with, but we had some additional pressure to do that. And so the question was, how do you go about something like this? How do you make sure that you in fact reduce your emissions and can help others to find that path as well? So we started with something that everybody honors, and that is a Blue Ribbon Commission. We called it our Green Ribbon Commission, and we asked them to help us come up with a plan for how we would reduce the community's emissions by 7%. And we led, as the city, by reducing our own corporate emissions by 60% from 1990 levels. We showed it could be done. We showed it could be done without breaking the bank or degrading services at all. And then the Blue Ribbon Commission, the Green Ribbon Commission helped put a plan together for us. And then step by step, we decided how we were going to implement that plan. And there was a lot of skepticism in the community. We have a newspaper in Seattle that is a bit more conservative than the community as a whole. And they said, we think it's okay that Mayor Nichols is talking about this global issue. We really just didn't think he was going to do anything. And that was when I proposed a commercial parking tax in our city, which is the closest that we have in terms of a tool like congestion pricing or the London fee. It allows you to put a price on people driving into the heart of the city. And so step by step we implemented that plan, we measured ourselves, and we decided after getting the plan together and having the business leadership and the environmental leadership and the civic leadership on board, that then we needed literally to have a grassroots campaign. And so Seattle Climate Action Now was literally a door-to-door campaign to talk to everybody in the city about what they could do in their own homes, in their own neighborhood, in their own business to reduce their carbon footprint. And as we measured our results, we found that we had in fact reduced our emissions by the amount we promised. So we felt very good about that. Now, that isn't the end of the story because, as we all know, we need to get an order of magnitude beyond that in order to avert a climate catastrophe. And so what I would suggest to you is that this is a challenge that binds us not only geographically. What you do here in Charleston and the Lowcountry affects me in Seattle. What I do in Seattle affects people in China. What China does affects Europe because this is one giant problem that we are attacking, and it doesn't really spare any of us for good behavior. So it is important that we recognize it helps to bring us together, because it certainly politically hasn't done that in the United States. And second, it binds us across generations. So my generation has a responsibility, I believe, to turn the trend, to start decreasing our emissions rather than increasing them as we have over the last many decades. Then we pass it on to the next generation, who is well represented in this room today, to take us the rest of the way, or to take us much of the rest of the way and then pass it on to the next generation with hope and with progress and with a plan. And so from that standpoint, it's really challenging to try and figure out how do we make this happen in a country where it doesn't seem that we can have a serious political conversation at the national level. We can't debate any issue without it becoming an opportunity for one side or the other to try and drive a wedge between people in this country. And I would suggest to you that the model that we have with the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement, the model that we have with the universities and university presidents across the country who emulated what we did as mayors, the model that we have with states coming together and talking to one another and adopting plans, is the model that's going to work for us on protecting the planet. And that is action at the local level and then interaction amongst people from the local level with one another, so that we can do something, it works well, and then it can be replicated in place after place after place, modified, of course, for local circumstances. And if we do that, then at some point it will become safe for our politicians in Washington, D.C. to have perhaps a serious conversation about this and take action. But the leadership is going to continue to have to be provided at the local level. And when we do get national energy policy and climate policy, it will be weak. And if we get a replacement for the Kyoto Treaty at the international level, it will be weak. And the reason is that it's going to have to satisfy the United States and China and India and farmers in France, and therefore there are going to be a lot of compromises. But that's okay, because once we get legislation nationally, once we get agreement internationally, we have a human commitment to trying to solve this problem. And once we get that human commitment, we can make it stronger over time, we can experiment, and we can take that creativity and innovation that we have and we can put it to work for us. So I think that there is hope for us. And I think there's also a sort of sword hanging over us, and that is that there's an old saying, a Finnish writer once said, because we don't think about future generations, they will never forget us. And I don't think any one of us in this room really wants to have that written on their headstone. And so we've had a good conversation this morning. And we've got 250 people in this room who have forsaken a beautiful day outside to come and talk about a very difficult set of issues. And we have a core of people here who've been working on these issues for 10, 15, 20, 25 years. So I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting me to be with you today to talk about these issues. And thank you for the efforts that you're going to make in the next 10 and 20 and 25 issues. And with that, I would like to open this up. We've got time before the session is over, although not as much as I had hoped. And I would like to ask you if you've got any questions, but particularly if you've got any observations about what you've seen work or not work that we can put to use in the next 25 years as we tackle this challenge. So thank you very much. Yes, ma'am.
All the years I know the last
The Alaskan White Viaduct, okay?
I'm the native born Alaska. They lived a long time in Seattle. I understand you're going to replace it with a tunnel under it. Where are you going to put all that stuff and take it out there?
All right, so the question was fairly Seattle-centric, which was as we take that viaduct down, which is a 6-lane elevated highway, and we replace at least part of the capacity with a 4-lane tunnel, 2 lanes each direction, where are we going to put the leavings? Right. So we've been building a mass transit system, and we've been tunneling. And we have found some really good ways of using that. It's a matter of thinking about what is happening in conjunction. So some of the leavings from the Sound Transit Light Rail Project tunnel we use to level out a right-of-way, a city light electrical right-of-way, and we created a trail system. And we would not have been able to do that. It couldn't have afforded to do that without those leavings. So we will look for ways to not dispose of it, but reuse it in a fashion that will benefit the community and the surrounding communities. Yes?
We in Charleston have a situation not unlike what you have in Seattle, where we have cruise ships here.
Yes.
Did you legislate for onshore power, or import cruise ships?
So the question has to do with cruise ships. So we have a very active cruise ship industry. We have 3 lines, 3 major lines, and the cruise ships go to Alaska. And it's really a little odd because the 3 ships leave within about 20 minutes of one another, and they literally follow each other up the coast and into town, and then everybody gets in line at all the shops. It's a little weird, but it works. And every one of those ships brings about $1 million into our local economy, so we like that. One of the things that we did in our climate plan was that we went with our municipally owned electric utility called Seattle City Light, and we brought it down to 0 net greenhouse gas emissions. So when you turn the lights on in Seattle, you are not toasting the planet. And we have an advantage there because we have a lot of hydroelectric power, but we got rid of coal, we brought on wind, and we emphasized conservation as a new resource. So one of the pieces that we needed to do, because we run yellow trucks around to fix broken wires, and they do put out greenhouse gases, is we needed to offset that. So we used that technique, and we wanted to offset it in a way where local people could see the impact, because we were buying offsets in Montana and other places, but people locally didn't understand what that was about. So we paid to bring the power lines sufficient to serve those cruise ships. And then we negotiated with the cruise ships. We didn't legislate it, but we negotiated with them to bring their ships up able to receive that power. So of the 3 lines, 2 of them did what was called cold ironing, shut their plants down and hooked into our local power. And because our local power is green, no greenhouse gas emissions, it was a 100% benefit. You shut off a diesel plant on one of those cruise ships, it's like 30,000 cars have left the roads. So, we did it through negotiation. One of the things that I found in my time as mayor is that if you can, and we were kind of talking about it in the last panel, you know, do you go with the masculine or the feminine? Well, it seems to me that you're going to be most effective when you bring them in line with one another. So if you're trying to accomplish something, a regulation is great, but if the regulation really goes against the market, it's going to be a lot less effective. So you try and move the market. That's why pricing carbon is so important. Once you put a price on the pollution that people are creating, then it's not going to be cheaper for them to behave in a polluting manner. So you bring the masculine and the feminine into alignment, and you're going to be more effective. So we found negotiation was effective for us in that circumstance. Yes?
Are there any lessons from your conversion to wind power that might apply to Charleston?
Well, are there any lessons we learned from wind power that we could apply here? So I don't know the local circumstance. The wind power in Washington State, it's been a remarkable thing to watch. Eastern Washington, so Washington State west of the Cascades is rainy. You've heard that we have rain. East of the Cascades is a desert, and that's 2/3 of the state's area. And it's very windy on the ridges. So if you go through Eastern Washington, you have huge wind farms, at least huge by our standards and historic standards. And we're really happy with that. There is a little bit of a problem, though, when you have a lot of wind and a lot of rain. because then you have enough hydroelectric power and enough wind power, but the two together, you have a surplus, and you're not always able to use that surplus, and so you got to figure out which are you going to shut down. Are you going to spill water, or are you going to shut down the turbines on the wind? And so there's a little bit of a learning curve, and we're still trying to figure out a part of that. We do have ways that we sell power to California, and then they can turn off a natural gas or a coal resource that they might be using. So if we have a better transmission system, we'll do more of that.
Do you use tides at all?
Do we use tides? We've experimented with that. We have not yet put it into a real practical application, but we are, with other public utilities, experimenting and trying to figure out when that'll be practical, and when the technology is there, we will employ that. Yes?
Is the old independent and socialist political mindset still alive in Seattle? And how does it relate to the environmental solution?
The question is, are we still socialists up in Washington State? And is that alive in the environmental movement? And I would say yes. Seattle is a very progressive city, and because of that, that was actually one of the things that drove me to take leadership on the climate issue, was that I could do it. I had a population in Seattle that would support, the Seattle Times notwithstanding, would support what I was doing. And that wouldn't be true, perhaps, in Cleveland. So I felt like we had a responsibility to step forward, take some risks, and we did take some risks, and learn from that and teach as well. So yes, in 2008, Barack Obama won every precinct in the city of Seattle, but one, and that one was tied at 0-0. Nobody voted. It was an industrial neighborhood. And he won them by an average of 85%. So yes, I would say we're left of center, and that affects our environmental standing, and for the better, I think. Who remembers? What year was it? Oh, that was well before. Yeah. No, I was not. I was president of the conference in 2009, and I became mayor in 2002. Yes. Well, the mayor's conference is still actively engaged in climate protection. We had established a center, and we were having annual summits on particular aspects of climate protection. I would say that my successors, to a greater or lesser extent, considered it a priority, and so a couple of them haven't brought the same passion to it that I had. But I would say that the mayors across the country continue to know better than our national leaders the impacts at the local level that are occurring, and the need for us to both mitigate and adapt. Yes?
This morning we heard a number of comments about growth.
Yes.
I'm curious, what was the attitude in Seattle about growth, and how did you deal with it?
Well, it's interesting. That's an issue that I've dealt with not only as mayor, but for the 14 years I was a county council member. So in those early days as a council member, we were dealing with the concept of growth management and how do you put that in place. And Western cities, and how many Westerners are here? Sharon, thank you. Okay, all right. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Western cities have a dichotomy. We hate sprawl and we despise density. And you can't really have it both ways. You've got to kind of figure out who you are, what you're going to be. And it was an interesting conversation for me to begin as mayor. We had growth management in place, so we had an urban growth line, As a county councilman, I voted to downzone hundreds of thousands of acres of land and take real value from real people in order to not have the kind of sprawl and awful growth pattern that we had been experiencing. And as mayor, I felt a responsibility to make sure the capacity was there, because it's basically jobs drive growth. If you've got jobs that are being created at Boeing or Microsoft or Starbucks or Amazon or Costco or Nordstrom or Weyerhaeuser, people are going to come to where that economic opportunity is. And if you create cities that are great places for people to be and places they want to be, then you're going to be able to shape that growth in a way that is much more efficient than what we've had since the end of World War II. So my staff came to me, and Steve can probably, he wasn't in the room when I did this, but my staff came to me and said, we have something from the past mayor called the Height and Density Initiative. And I threw them out of my office. Because if I started a conversation called height and density, it was very clear what the outcome would be. No, we don't want that. We like things the way they are. And so what we did instead was we had a 2-year-long civic conversation about what we wanted Seattle to be. People said we want it to be a dynamic and vibrant place. We want it to be a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week place. We want it to be a place of diversity of opportunities and activities and people. And then we could talk about density as a tool to get there. And people said, okay, that's what I want to get to. That's a tool to get there. I will accept that tool, that if you had started with the tool, wouldn't have happened. And so we have seen a significant population increase in the center city and in the suburbs immediately around the center city. We now have a mass transit system that is, over the generations, going to help shape that growth and how it occurs. And we have, not universally, but generally public acceptance of what's happening. We had a neighborhood called Ballard. Ballard had a lot of the early Scandinavian settlers. Ballard was known as a kind of a slow and sleepy place. In fact, there was a local television show called Almost Live that made fun of Ballard drivers as generally driving about 15 miles an hour. Today, Ballard has a skyline, Ballard has great restaurants, and Ballard has great shopping. It is a very dynamic and vibrant place, still a home to much of the Scandinavian community and the older community, but now also a home to younger people, singles and young couples and young families. And so people have seen the change and have started to not only accept it, but actually enjoy it. You'll let me know. Yes?
So between Seattle and Charleston, two similarities. So there's overfishing, like salmon in Seattle, and I think that's down like 80% of the park. And then, of course, we have some overfishing here. And we have, obviously, fishermen that need their economy, their business. But then, of course, that's not sustainable for the fish. And then you have the outside person, right? And the Seattle and Charleston. So just tell me a little bit of how we can learn from each other. And then, as a follow-up, also like Pike's Place Market, fish market, and the farmer's market. I think that's every day, and that's permanent structure.
Yes.
We have a really great farmer's market here, but it's only on the weekends. It's
Okay.
really great. It's just on the weekend, and then we take it all down.
Okay.
So those two things just show
Okay.
how we can learn from each other.
All right, fishing and farmers markets. So the North Pacific Fleet is basically headquartered and provisioned in Seattle, and an important part of our economy, an older part of our economy, but a valued one. And I don't know those resource issues very well as a city guy, but I think there's been a change in the approach to it. In the 70s and 80s, it very much was kind of the commercial fisher persons against the tribal fishing. And the tribes have rights by treaty to access to that resource. And so there's a big fight over what was a diminishing resource. And that's changed now to more of a cooperation and a recognition that if we can grow the pie, then everyone is going to benefit to some extent. And so I think that's a more hopeful and likely more successful strategy. I honestly don't know how successful it is and at what point we are in those resource depletions along the coast. but I think we're approaching it from a way that there's more likely to be success. Farmers markets. So wonderful dinner last night with all the local foods and the like, and I enjoyed that very, very much, and felt like I was at home, although the foods you grow here, the produce you grow here is a little different than ours, and actually a little earlier in the season than ours. But the Pike Place Market, which is kind of an icon of Seattle, was established in 1907 as a protest against the high cost of onions. Onions had gone up tenfold in price, and people were tired of it, and the farmers and the city folk got together and created this Pike Market, and it is the longest continuously operating farmers market in America, and we're proud of it. It was threatened by urban renewal 20 or 30 years ago. We invested a lot of public money to save it. It made really good decisions about that, and it will be with us as long as I'm alive, and I think many generations beyond. So we are very proud of that. We also have a network of farmers markets in our neighborhoods. So I think there were 3 or 4 in place when I became mayor. When I left, there were 15. So those are once a week, 2, 3, 4 hours. And for many of those farmers, it represents 50 to 100% of their income. So, and it creates a great social place for people to come together. They're the best places in town to campaign, I'll be honest with you. People were in a good mood, and they wanted to talk in addition to getting their, and we tried to expand it and make it and many of them are year-round now. We expanded it to include meat and fish. We've expanded it to include, one of our best products is Washington wine. One of the things I worry about when we talk about having all local is if we try to drink all the great wine produced in Washington, we're going to be dysfunctional as a community. But we've tried to open it up to other kinds of agricultural products that are value added in addition to the produce and the direct products from farm. And that's been, I think, a big benefit as well to our farmers. So
I think we're
great
about
thing, and we're on the same. Yes. One last question?
I think we're at our time limit, and Ledley,
Okay.
we'll get you the next one.
All right.
Sorry.
Thank you. Congratulations.